Hey everyone, what's going on? I am Michael, and I am here to just talk a little. Uh, Yesterday we did a podcast on the Flyers and the Phillies acquisition of Jake Arrieta. Um, I wanted to take a little time for myself to do a little podcast, talk a little sports, little Flyers, Philadelphia sports, news, anything else that's on my mind that kind of comes up. So let's get this thing going. So, first of all, start off with a little Flyers talk. The Flyers face the uh, Vegas Golden Knights tonight. I couldn't remember for some reason. I will be attending that game, um, as well as the game Thursday night against the Blue Jackets. But more on the game tonight against what is probably the biggest shock of the NHL season so far, and Vegas Golden Knights. The expansion team that somehow managed to be one of the best teams in the West, in the league for that matter. And for the most part, they're battling Nashville for the first spot, and the Flyers are hosting them tonight. And in their first meeting, they beat in Vegas about a month ago, I would say. They beat them in a close game, and tonight's game was no different. It's going to be the same lineup as on Saturday, and their victory against Winnipeg, which to me isn't a surprise in a game where they looked pretty good for the most part. Very few mistakes all around. Besides the couple penalties at the end by Konechny, which Hextall then benched him, which was a surprise to me, which seems to be his MO with players if they take too many stick infractions in a game or aren't really important for closing out a game. He'll just kind of double shift Voracek or Couturier or someone in lieu of that player. And for Saturday night, it was Konechny, or Saturday afternoon, I guess I should say. It was Konechny, which I find a little annoying, but, that's kind of his way. He did it with Patrick earlier in the season, where he'd bring him down to the fourth line if he took too many if he took too many stick penalties. I know for a while he was having trouble having a wild stick and high sticks and all these high sticking infractions, and it looks like the punishment seems to have helped him. He's definitely come out of his shell from the beginning of the season. He's looked dynamic every time he's on the ice, and especially with Lindblom up and Voracek, his line mates, it's definitely a fun line, and they get numerous opportunities. Even in the game against Boston, he had a great setup to Voracek on the power play, and when he was doing a great job, and Phil of Simmons as a net for presence on the first power play, which shows how well he has improved, especially from the beginning of the season, and which he was definitely still coming off of that injury, off the surgery from this offseason, and then the concussion he had earlier. But he's definitely come in on his own. But anyway, back to the game tonight. If we haven't gone back to the Flyers after their first run in Vegas, the 4-1 game victory, definitely one of an important one, one where they looked pretty dominant throughout. One factor in that game was the many turnovers, or taking a little too many penalties in the game, I'd feel. but pretty good game nonetheless. You had Giroux and Couturier obviously scoring, and McDonald and Agudas pitching in, which is good for the Flyers this year, seeing their defense come up in big at times, scoring important key goals or just helping the Flyers offensively. Just look at Haig before he got hurt. He's out with 2 weeks with a lower body injury, but in the game against Tampa Bay and in Ottawa a couple weeks ago, he scored and showed he has a bit of offensive good hands on those ones. Even the one against Vasilevsky, it was more he kind of caught him off guard a little, and he didn't really look the strongest in that game, but nonetheless, he still looks good, and I think that's important for him going forward. If when he comes back, to get that body back on the blue line, I think he's had a pretty decent year. Haig, he obviously leads the league in hits, even though that might not last long with his injuries, obviously. But still, if he can add that offensiveness to his game, that can definitely help that second pair, which at times can look a little bad, I guess is a kind of way of putting it. But they definitely had their good opportunities, but they've certainly seemed to be the third pair, at least minutes-wise recently, has been the Haig and McDonald pair. And we talked about this yesterday a little, Mitchell and I, about the use of Manning and the Agudas pair being seemingly on the ice all the time, especially last game. They started the game, obviously, and they seem to be Hextall's sort of go-to pair, even though they've been struggling. Agudas recently has been coming up and doing a lot better than he was before. He was struggling, but he's had a few good plays. In the Pittsburgh game, he's had a few good plays in the PK, and it's just, I don't know, that line's just a little, it's not the best. They've obviously had trouble a lot of times just getting out of our own zone. It seems that even in last game against Winnipeg, there was a lot of times where once the puck dropped, it was automatically in our zone, and they got a shot off. And even the first couple minutes of the game, they had a opportunity to score, and luckily Mrazek was able to cover it. And I don't know, they've just had a little struggle lately, and it's good to see Sanheim back up, though, because of that, even though Manning kind of took his spot after coming back from his injury about a couple months ago, probably at the beginning of the year. But Sanheim, I feel, has been someone who deserves to be up, but I don't know how long that would be, especially with how the team has been, and just with the injuries and everything. I don't know if they're going to use one of their call-ups, last three remaining call-ups on him, but even if they did, that's a good piece to have. But then once all the injured players come back, how they'll do that, and I don't think Hextall, reason to bring him down is so he can get more ice time, and so he's not just riding in the press box the whole time. Even though he could easily is probably better than most of the defense the Flyers are putting out game after game. But regardless, that seems to be the way, and I don't know what happens when Oduya comes back, or in 2 weeks when Haig comes back, what's going to happen with him. Whether he stays in the lineup and just plays in lieu of Oduya, and Oduya is just that healthy scratch, and then when Haig comes back, he goes back down, or what happens. But it's just, it's going to be interesting to see. He obviously is a lot better than than the league he's playing in the AHL. He has shown that since being called down and being so productive. And even in this first game back, the other game, he looked probably one of our best defensemen, I would say. He had a lot of outlet passes. He was breaking up plays, jumped up in a couple opportunities, and didn't really have any poor shifts, besides maybe one or two. But other than that, and just a few minutes of the game, they didn't get a lot. But he definitely played well and is deserving of the call up. And I just hope it's one that continues and is definitely deserving of his call up. But to continue, let's go back to maybe a little more playoff talk, because you know how close the Metro is right now, and with win tonight, the Flyers could be tied with Washington in points with 83. But that's all depending on the outcome of their game against Winnipeg, which should definitely be a good match against Patrick Laine and Alexander Ovechkin, the two leading goal scorers in the NHL right now with 40. So that should be definitely a game to look out or watch out for, or watch if you're looking for a game to watch. But if you just look at it right now, like we talked about last night, at the moment, if the season were to end, we'd be playing Pittsburgh, which, again, like we said yesterday, it's not been a good season. Really, recently, the past two seasons hasn't really been the kindest in the Flyers' favor, in the Flyers and the rivalry of Pennsylvania. Which, I mean, it makes sense because Pittsburgh has definitely come up, obviously, because they won the past two Stanley Cups. Hopefully it's not a third, fingers crossed, right? It would be a fun series nonetheless, but it could be a one where the Flyers possibly swept maybe 5 games. And then there's also the possibility of us playing Washington, or who knows what happens. There's a lot of games left. There's a lot of games left, and anything could really happen playoff-wise. And like I said yesterday, I'd probably prefer playing the Capitals than the Penguins. I think the Flyers, like Mitchell said, was definitely match up better. And even like looking down the lineup, they've kind of struggled this year, even though they've been at the top of the Metro for almost all year. But it's, I don't know. It's besides Ovechkin being Ovechkin and a couple others. Hope he's kind of had a down year and everything. I just think at the moment the Flyers probably match up better against the Capitals than the Penguins. But even just looking at the teams, just look how much the NHL's really changed over the past couple years. Like the Avalanche, who was the worst team last year, is right now in a playoff spot, and they're battling for the last wild card, but still it's impressive that they were able to turn around this much. Winnipeg, obviously, Dallas obviously made many moves just to try to contend for this year, and again they're another team in the hunt they're in the wild card, so, and they still have teams chasing after them. Calgary and LA. LA being a point behind Colorado, and Calgary 2 points. at 79, 78. But still, anything is possible, and who knows? LA could knock Anaheim out of the playoffs. They're also 1 point ahead, which would be interesting. That a team that made it to the Western Conference is possibly have a possibility of missing the playoffs, which would be surprising to me. And other surprises, obviously, Florida being good, and they can easily take out Columbus or New Jersey if they stumble on their next couple of games in a very tough schedule that they're in. After really kind of holding on and at the great start they had at the beginning of the year, and kind of Taylor Hall kind of doing everything for them, it's kind of, I don't know, it could be the team that falls out, or maybe Columbus. Who knows? And Florida can somehow get in. It should be interesting to see how the season plays out for the rest of the for the playoffs and wild card and all that. And who knows? The Flyers can go on another stretch run, and the Penguins and Capitals could start falling off a little, and they could take the Metro. Anything's possible, right? I'm not saying that. I mean, it's possible, but who knows? If they could take them, I think where they are now, it's probably where they'll end up as the third team in the Metro. It's probably going to end up like this. We're probably most likely playing the Penguins in the playoffs, and hopefully it's something that reignites the rivalry. It's definitely been down in the last year or so. After it was always huge, and obviously the playoff series could reignite that. Anything really can reignite that, but either way, it should be fun hockey. And if anything, these past couple games, and still games still to come for the Flyers in a pretty tough stretch, are shown that this is who they're most likely playing the playoffs that they were going to go. So it's important for them to kind of turn it around. It's great that they beat Winnipeg, one of the top teams in the West. But can they take that and bring it into tonight's game against Vegas and then continue it? Granted, after this game, that's a little lighter on games, but still they still have Columbus Thursday, Washington, Pittsburgh again. And then Boston again. So who knows what will happen. And also Colorado and Dallas, who are in the playoffs right now. So who knows what will happen with the Flyers right now. They looked great in the Boston game. It just always seems that way of how games late in the season go when they have to go up to Boston, and always those last second heartbreakers. Even though the past couple seasons it's been those games that kind of or make us like knocked out of the playoffs essentially. But this time it was just the heartbreaking loss, even though everyone saw it coming, and it wasn't even Lions' fault for that to happen. I still think Hextall has to be smart in how they play, both Mrazek and Lyon, and I think that game off for Mrazek was huge for him. Came off the backside of it back-to-back, but giving up 18 goals in the last, and the previous games before that, or 20 goals in the last handful of games. That's not very good, and he obviously needed that rest, and rest is kind of key for him because with the injuries to Elliott and Neuvert, it's kind of him going to the season, even though Hextall did say yesterday there's a small chance of both of them playing again before the season ends. Which would be great because Elliott would obviously go back to being our starter. He was been solid for us for the whole year, even though his numbers would kind of neglect that. But he's definitely come up in key moments, gotten key saves for us. So he's definitely one of the reasons why we're where we are now, and why we've gone on such a tear, or why we had such a good record since the middle of December, essentially. Um, and streaky teams tend to be the ones that succeed in the NHL. And if the Flyers can go on another stretch run where they're winning hockey games again and going to the playoffs that way, that'd be great. It'd be definitely helpful going forward, get them the confidence they need. But if it's like the past few games and they're losing and they're not really looking that good, they're not scoring as much, then it's not as good to be lumping into the playoffs. And that's it. Wouldn't be a good series no matter who we're playing, because if you're limping into the playoffs, it's going to be hard to find something besides maybe just being in the playoffs to be that way to get you into the next round, or however the playoffs were to be or to go. Just look at Minnesota last year. They struggled near the end of the season, and they got eliminated in the first round. That's just an example of if you're a team that's limping into the playoffs, it's just not going to go well. And to kind of go back to the Flyers, as I've kind of been talking about them this whole time, another thing that does kind of go back to full circle, back to Hextall and his and all the things that come with them and everything. It's a little polarizing is the word I'm looking for there. Polarizing, Michael. Polarizing. Ooh. But yeah, he's been a little polarizing to everyone. There's always the, oh, he should be fired, and he doesn't know how to handle people. Laterra shouldn't be in the lineup. It should be Wheel and Lear, and why are you sitting valuable players and in lieu of these people or players like Manning, in lieu of Sanheim and all this. But I'm someone who's a little in the middle with Hextall. I think this season he's definitely been better. He hasn't had the same problems as he did last year, where besides the game on Saturday with Konechny, where he would always put him in the press box because of his penalties and everything. This season he's actually gone pretty well with him. He said at the beginning, during the offseason, he wanted to give him Konechny more opportunities, and it's finally coming. He's been probably our best scoring threat since he got moved up to the Couturier and Drew line. And there's just, that's always a positive coming out of the season and everything. But then you always have those things where near the end of games where he waits a little longer to pull the goalie if we're down one, or there's times where it looks like a timeout should probably be used because someone just scored and we looked a little razzled and another one almost went by, and a timeout probably would have been good to settle everyone, come back, say to calm down. But he tends to wait until the end of the game, where he always tends to use that timeout if we're down, just to get the top unit some rest and come up with a play to try to score with a couple seconds left, which I find kind of a little annoying. Just, I feel, after coming from Laviolette, who was, I think, one of the best at using timeouts We've always seen that through his years in Philadelphia and everything, which makes him a great coach and why Nashville is and first in the West. But still, then you see Hextall and how he uses his timeouts, and it just seems that they just aren't really that useful or don't really come at the right times, in my opinion. That's just my thinking of it. And I could be wrong. Maybe he's smart for doing that, to hold on to the timeouts. I just find there's been situations where we've been down one, where it's been good to calm the troops, as you say. And yeah. I think that's all I have for today. Tune in next time. I'll probably do this again tomorrow. Recaps of the game. Anything else that'll come up. So subscribe to my Twitter, Whitmer96, my Facebook, and that's to get all the updates and everything, and when I'll be online. See ya.